4:12 local time. Strait of Hormuz. Inside the Command Information Center of the escorting destroyer, the sonar operator leans closer to the display. His eyes narrow as a thin acoustic trace begins to form across the screen. At first, nothing seems unusual, just the constant background noise of shallow water. Merchant traffic, distant engines, the deep vibration of tankers moving through the narrow shipping lanes of the Gulf. Then something different appears, a faint low-frequency signature, slow, steady, bearing 142. The operator listens again through his headset. The rhythm is unmistakable. Heavy propeller blades, even spacing, controlled movement. Not a merchant vessel, not surface traffic, something beneath the water. Con, sonar, possible submerged contact bearing 142. The officer of the deck does not answer right away. In the Strait of Hormuz, false readings are common. The water is shallow, crowded, and acoustically chaotic. Every sound bounces, bends, and mixes with something else. But then the display flickers again. A second signature appears, bearing 155, almost the same acoustic profile. Another submerged contact, and this one is moving, slowly closing toward the carrier group. Now the operator's voice changes. Con, sonar, second contact confirmed, subsurface, bearing 155. Inside the CIC, several heads turn toward the sonar console. Two contacts, both showing diesel-electric characteristics, both moving toward the same point. The aircraft carrier at the center of the formation. Before anyone can speak, a third signature appears, bearing 168. Another propeller pattern, another submerged engine, three separate acoustic tracks, three different bearings, all converging. The room becomes quieter. Con, sonar, we now have three possible submarines. For a moment, the words seem to hang in the air. Three submarines inside the narrowest choke point of the Persian Gulf, in a passage less than 40 miles across. The officer of the deck turns immediately toward the tactical display. Range? The sonar operator checks the data again. Estimated 11 nautical miles. Closing slow, speed 4 knots. 4 knots is not transit speed. 4 knots is shadowing speed, slow enough to stay quiet, fast enough to slide into position. Inside the CIC, the acoustic analysts begin working fast. Blade count, propeller rhythm, engine harmonics. Every submarine leaves its own fingerprint in the water. Within seconds, the classification begins to take shape. Diesel-electric propulsion, large propeller diameter, heavy hull displacement. One analyst leans closer to the console. Possible kilo-class profile. Another technician checks the second track. The third one is smaller. Could be Fateh class. Iranian submarines operating inside the strait, and already within the outer edge of their operational envelope. 4:14. The tactical display updates again. Three red symbols appear beneath the surface layer of the map. Each one creeps closer toward the carrier group. The aircraft carrier continues moving at steady speed through the shipping lane, surrounded by destroyers and cruisers in a protective screen. Above the water, everything looks normal. Tankers move slowly through the traffic lanes. Morning light reflects across the calm Gulf surface. Nothing appears out of place, but below the surface, the geometry of a coordinated underwater move is beginning to form. Three submarines, three approach angles, one central target path. The sonar operator listens again. For a few seconds, the propeller noise fades. Then it returns. One of the submarines has changed course. Bearing shift 5 degrees. Now it is lining up directly with the carrier's projected track. Inside the CIC, the tactical officer speaks quietly into the internal communication line. Bridge, CIC, possible triple submarine contact. Recommend underwater defense posture. On the carrier's bridge, the captain receives the report. He listens without interrupting. Three subs, inside 11 nautical miles, converging. There is no raised voice, no panic, no rush of words, only a short response. Very well. A pause. Then the order that quietly changes the posture of the entire carrier group. Set condition 3, underwater defense watch. Across multiple ships, the shift begins instantly. Sonar teams move to active standby. Helicopter crews start engines on the flight decks. Destroyers subtly adjust their spacing around the carrier. The formation tightens, but underwater the submarines keep moving. Slow, silent, patient. 4:17. The sonar operator hears it first. A sudden metallic thud travels through the water. Then comes the sharp, violent roar of high-speed propeller ignition. The acoustic spectrum spikes. The sonar operator's head snaps up. Another launch, then another. Three separate acoustic signatures, three different bearings, all accelerating at once. His voice cuts across the CIC. Incoming underwater contact. A second later, he corrects himself. Multiple contacts. 3. Correction. 4. High speed. On the tactical display, the new tracks appear like arrows racing through the water. They are already moving faster than anything a submarine could match. Straight toward the carrier group, 3 Iranian submarines have just released their payloads, and somewhere in the dark water beneath the Strait of Hormuz, an invisible clock has started counting down. 4:18 local time. The warning echoes through the Combat Information Center. Incoming underwater contact. For a fraction of a second, the room goes completely still. Then training takes over. Every screen inside the CIC shifts into tracking mode. Sonar returns flood the displays as the fast-moving contacts cut hard acoustic trails through the narrow waters of the strait. The sonar operator locks onto the first one. High-speed propeller signature, heavy cavitation, bearing 153, speed increasing. Con, sonar, contact 1 confirmed, range 8,000 yards, closing fast. Another operator tracks the second. Different bearing, different submarine. Second contact bearing 166, similar profile. Then a third and a fourth. The acoustic picture begins to stabilize. 4 separate inbound contacts, released almost simultaneously from 3 different directions. The pattern becomes clear at once. Inside the CIC, the tactical officer studies the display for less than 2 seconds before speaking. Coordinated underwater pattern. The submarines did not act randomly. Each boat released along a separate vector, creating a wide triangular pressure zone around the carrier's projected path. The concept is simple. Force the carrier to turn away from one danger, only to move closer to another. Classic submarine doctrine, extremely difficult to counter when timed correctly. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier, the captain receives the update. 4 inbound contacts, different bearings. The decision comes immediately. Helm, hard port, 20 degrees. The massive carrier begins to respond, but a ship displacing 100,000 tons does not turn quickly. Even with nuclear reactors driving full power through 4 shafts, the momentum is enormous. The carrier starts a slow, heavy arc through the water. Below decks, the engineering spaces increase shaft output. Above decks, crew members brace by instinct as the giant vessel begins to pivot. But the carrier was never built to outrun something moving that fast. That is why the escorts are there. 419, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers surge forward from their screening positions. USS Mason, USS Gravely. Their mission changes instantly. Protect the carrier, draw the incoming contacts away, locate the submarines. Deploy Nixie. The command moves across both destroyers at almost the same moment. Behind each ship, the AN/SLQ-25 Nixie decoy system drops into the water. A long cable streams out behind the destroyer, towing a small acoustic device through the sea. Within seconds, it begins transmitting a powerful artificial signature, louder than the ship itself, designed to pull underwater threats away from real targets. Inside the CIC, the tracks keep closing. Range 6,000 yards, speed 50 knots. The water around the carrier group is now filled with sound. Destroyers turning, decoys transmitting, sonar pulses rolling outward, and above the formation, the first helicopter lifts off. An MH-60R Seahawk lifts from the destroyer's flight deck. Its rotors cut through the air as the helicopter climbs low over the water, accelerating across the calm surface of the strait. Seconds later, a second Seahawk rises from another ship. The crews do not need a long explanation. They already know the mission. Find the submarines. Because the moment a submarine releases something into the water, it leaves behind a trail. 420. Back inside the CIC, the underwater picture grows tighter. The first inbound contact suddenly changes course. Its seeker has locked onto the Nixie decoy trailing behind one of the destroyers. Contact 1 diverting. On the display, the acoustic trace bends sharply away from the carrier. The decoy is working. Seconds later, the second contact shifts as well. The artificial signature is louder, closer, and far more convincing than the fading echo of the carrier's propellers. But the third contact does not turn. It stays fixed on the original path. The carrier. Contact 3 still tracking carrier bearing. Range now under 4,000 yards. Inside the CIC, the tension rises. At 50 knots, that distance disappears fast. Then the fourth contact begins to adjust course. But not toward the decoy, toward the carrier's new heading. The submarine crews expected the carrier to maneuver, and they planned for it. Now 2 inbound contacts are still following the carrier's path. The strike group continues to shift hard through the water. Destroyers cross the carrier's wake. Helicopters rush toward the source bearings. Sonar systems send active pulses deep beneath the surface. Each metallic ping rolls across the seabed like thunder. Searching, listening, closing in. 421. One of the helicopters receives the first strong return. A solid echo, large hull, depth roughly 400 feet. Bearing matches one of the release vectors. The pilot banks hard. Contact confirmed. The search has found its source, but behind them, beneath the carrier group, the inbound contacts are still closing. Range now 2,000 yards. Less than 2 minutes remain, 4:21 local time. Above the carrier group, the first MH-60R Seahawk turns sharply toward the contact. The helicopter flies low, barely 200 feet above the water. Rotor wash tears white streaks across the calm surface as the aircraft races toward the suspected submarine position. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator studies the tactical feed coming from the destroyer below. One contact, large, submerged, depth estimated at 400 feet, speed minimal, trying to fade into the background. But once a submarine reveals itself, disappearing becomes far more difficult. The Seahawk crew already knows the next step. Prepare sonobuoys! The rear door slides open. Seconds later, the first cylindrical buoy drops into the sea, then another and another. Within moments, a line of acoustic sensors spreads across the water like a listening net. Each buoy deploys a hydrophone beneath the surface, sending real-time data back to the helicopter. The operator adjusts his headset. The ocean suddenly fills with sound. Propeller wash, hydraulic noise. The distant high-speed scream of the inbound contacts, and beneath it all, the low mechanical rhythm of a submarine trying to stay hidden. Contact acquired. Bearing 164. The helicopter circles wider. More sonobuoys drop into the water. The listening grid expands quickly across the contact area. In less than 2 minutes, dozens of sensors are feeding data into the carrier group's combat network. The seafloor beneath the Strait of Hormuz is no longer silent. It has become an active search zone. 4:22. Back near the carrier, the underwater picture keeps changing. Two inbound contacts suddenly veer away. Their seekers have locked onto the destroyer's decoys, chasing the louder artificial signature trailing through the water. The first contact passes safely behind the escort ship. Seconds later, a powerful underwater pressure event ripples far from the formation, triggered well outside the carrier's path. Inside the CIC, one track disappears from the screen. Contact one removed. But the remaining contacts are still closing. One begins circling the decoy field, confused, searching. The fourth contact remains fixed on the carrier's propulsion signature. Range now 1,500 yards. On the carrier's bridge, the captain gives another order. Rudder hard starboard. The giant ship begins to swing again, changing course to make the tracking solution harder. Below the surface, the seeker tries to lock onto the carrier's new position. The underwater environment has turned chaotic. Multiple ships maneuvering, decoys broadcasting false acoustic signals, sonar pulses echoing across the seabed. For a fraction of a second, the inbound contact hesitates. That moment is enough. The Nixie decoy drifts directly into its path. The seeker locks onto the stronger signal and turns sharply away from the carrier. Seconds later, another distant underwater pressure wave rolls through the strait. The last inbound contact is gone. But the situation is not over, because the submarines that released them are still below. 4:23. The Seahawk helicopter tightens its orbit above the sonobuoy grid. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watches the pattern become clearer. 3 submarines, one trying to move south, another slowing almost completely, the third descending deeper, likely trying to hide beneath the thermocline layer, where sound bends in unpredictable ways. The operator speaks calmly over the intercom. Primary contact confirmed, Kilo class profile, depth 420 feet. The pilot glances toward the targeting display. System ready? Ready. The helicopter levels out above the target area. Below the aircraft, the water looks perfectly calm. No sign of the steel hull moving hundreds of feet beneath the surface. The Seahawk's crew initiates release. The Mark 54 drops from beneath the helicopter. It hits the sea with a sharp splash and vanishes below the waves. For a brief moment, nothing happens. Then its motor engages. A trail of bubbles marks its path as the system accelerates downward. Unlike the contacts released by the submarines, this one is being guided toward a specific acoustic source using data from the helicopter's sensor grid. Inside the Seahawk, the operator watches the tracking display closely. 2 symbols move across the screen. One submarine, one Mark 54, distance closing fast. Underwater, the Iranian submarine crew realizes the situation has changed. Their attempt to remain hidden has turned into exposure. They begin an emergency maneuver. Ballast tanks flood. The submarine descends deeper, trying to escape into the cluttered terrain near the seabed, but the Mark 54 is already adjusting. It follows the turn. It closes the distance. 4:24. A powerful underwater pressure event rolls through the water. The force moves upward, briefly lifting the surface above the contact point. On the Seahawk's display, the submarine track vanishes. One Iranian submarine contact is gone. But 2 more remain somewhere beneath the narrow waters of Hormuz, and the helicopters are already searching for them. 4:24 local time. For a brief moment, the ocean surface above the carrier group looks calm again. But inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display shows a very different picture. One submarine contact has disappeared, two remain. Both are moving now, both attempting to retreat deeper into the strait. But the US Navy already has their positions. Because what the Iranian crews never realized is that their movement had been tracked long before the first inbound contact ever entered the water, 12 hours earlier. Long before the carrier group entered the narrowest section of the Strait of Hormuz, a Boeing P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft had quietly flown a surveillance pattern across the region. The mission looked routine, at least from the outside. But during that flight, the Poseidon released more than 100 sonobuoys across a wide grid stretching nearly 70 square miles. Each buoy carried a sensitive hydrophone capable of detecting the faintest mechanical sound beneath the surface. Propeller rhythm, hull vibration, engine harmonics. Individually, each buoy listened to only a small patch of ocean. Together, they formed a dense underwater detection web, a silent surveillance network already waiting beneath the shipping lanes. So when the Iranian submarines slipped quietly into the strait earlier that night, the Navy had already heard them. Their entry bearings, their speeds, even their gradual movement toward the strike group's projected route. At first, the submarines maintained strict silence, slow speed, careful navigation along the seafloor, classic diesel-electric infiltration tactics. But the sonobuoy grid had already captured their acoustic fingerprints. Analysts aboard the P-8A and the destroyers monitoring the data could see the pattern forming hours in advance. 3 submarines moving into a triangular approach, each one positioning itself on a separate vector. The geometry was impossible to ignore. A coordinated interception setup. Instead of changing course immediately, the strike group continued its planned transit. The carrier moved forward, the escorts held formation. Nothing on the surface looked different. But beneath that calm exterior, the Navy had already begun preparing for what might come next. Additional helicopters were placed on standby. Destroyers tightened their screening distance. Sonar operators began paying even closer attention to the buoy network. They watched the submarines move slowly into range. They watched the pattern develop. And when the fast-moving underwater contacts finally entered the water, the strike group was already ready to respond. Now back in the present moment, the window is closing. 4:25. The second Seahawk helicopter arrives above the sonobuoy field. Its crew immediately begins scanning the acoustic grid for the remaining submarine contacts. The sensor operator studies the display carefully. One contact is moving south, speed increasing, attempting to escape. The other has slowed dramatically, possibly trying to settle near the seabed, where sonar reflections become harder to read. But the buoy network already has their bearings locked. Contact 2 confirmed, the operator says. Depth 450 feet. The pilot banks the helicopter sharply toward the position. Below the aircraft, the water remains perfectly calm. But 400 feet down, a submarine is moving through the dock. Inside that submarine, the crew now understands the situation. Their first move failed, and American helicopters are already above them. The captain orders a deeper descent. Ballast tanks flood. The submarine drops farther into the cold, dense water near the bottom of the strait. The crew hopes the cluttered seabed will confuse the sensors tracking them. But the helicopter already has a solution. System ready, the sensor operator confirms. The Seahawk stabilizes briefly above the target zone. Then the second Mark 54 unit is released. It drops cleanly into the sea. For a moment, it sinks in silence. Then its motor engages. A sharp trail of bubbles marks its acceleration as it begins searching through the water column. Inside the helicopter, the operator tracks both symbols on the display, the submarine, and the incoming countermeasure. The distance between them is shrinking fast. Underwater, the submarine makes an urgent maneuver, sharp turn, speed increase, trying to break away from the seeker. But modern underwater systems do not simply chase in a straight line. They listen, they adjust, they adapt. The Mark 54 curves smoothly through the water, locking again onto the submarine's acoustic signature. Closing, faster, closer, 426. A deep underwater pressure wave rolls through the strait. The Seahawk's sensors register it instantly. The submarine contact disappears from the tactical display. A rising column of bubbles marks the contact point far below. 2 submarine tracks are now gone. But somewhere in the complex underwater terrain of the Strait of Hormuz, one Iranian submarine is still moving. And every sonobuoy in the network is listening for it. 4:27 local time. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display stabilizes again. Moments earlier, the screen had been alive with motion. Inbound tracks, sonar pulses, evasive maneuvers, helicopters crossing the grid above the strait. Now, 2 of the red submarine symbols have disappeared. Confirmed removed from the picture. 1 contact remains, bearing 187. Depth unknown, speed increasing. The 3rd Iranian submarine is running. The sonar operator adjusts the gain on his headset and listens carefully. At first, the sound is faint, just the distant hum of machinery far beneath the water. Then the signature becomes clearer. Propeller cavitation, higher RPM. The submarine captain has increased speed. Moving faster means making more noise, but moving slowly means there may be no way out. The crew has chosen escape. Above the surface, the Seahawk helicopters widen their search pattern. The first aircraft moves west, releasing additional sonobuoys to extend the acoustic grid deeper into the strait. The second Seahawk circles over the last known contact point, listening for movement beneath the thermocline layer. Within minutes, the sonobuoy network expands again. Dozens of sensors now listen across the water column. Every hydrophone feeds live data back to the destroyers. Every faint mechanical sound is captured. 4:29. The destroyer's sonar team regains a stronger signal. Con, sonar, possible submarine bearing 189, range 4 nautical miles. The contact is deeper now, likely staying close to the uneven seabed where underwater ridges scatter sonar returns and make the picture harder to read. The submarine is trying to use the environment as cover, but the Strait of Hormuz is not deep. Its shallow waters make hiding difficult. Every maneuver creates turbulence. Every change in propeller speed leaves a trace. And the Navy is listening from every direction. The tactical officer studies the display for several seconds. The submarine is moving south toward the narrow channel leading deeper into the Persian Gulf. If it reaches the heavier commercial shipping lanes, tracking it will become much harder. Tankers, cargo vessels, hundreds of engines, a wall of background noise. The submarine captain is trying to disappear inside it. The Seahawk nearest the contact moves immediately. Vector to contact, the pilot says calmly. The aircraft banks south and accelerates low over the water. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watches the tracking data update. The submarine's speed increases again. 6 knots, then 8. Too fast to remain quiet, but fast enough to reach the edge of the sensor grid. The mission systems officer prepares another Mark 4 unit. But aboard the destroyer, the tactical officer hesitates. The submarine is still inside the surveillance network, still being tracked, still visible. Engaging it now would be possible, but letting it continue could reveal something more valuable. Where it goes, where it reports, where its support point may be waiting. The decision moves quickly across the strike group. Maintain tracking, no release, not yet. 4:31. The submarine continues south. Its propeller noise grows weaker as the distance increases, but the sonobuoy network continues to follow it. Bearing updates every few seconds, every course change logged, every increase in speed recorded. The crew believes they are escaping. In reality, they are still being watched. Above the strait, the Seahawk helicopters slowly widen their patrol pattern. One aircraft climbs slightly, scanning the horizon for additional surface contacts. The other remains low, orbiting the final submarine's projected path. Below them, the carrier group reforms its protective formation. Destroyers slide back into their screening positions. Cruisers stabilize their radar coverage. The aircraft carrier resumes steady speed through the strait. No damage, no injuries. The underwater encounter lasted less than 15 minutes. Inside the CIC, the final submarine contact grows weaker as it approaches the southern edge of the sensor grid. Eventually, the acoustic trace fades into the noise of distant tanker traffic. The operator slowly removes his headset. Contact lost, but the data remains. Every sonar recording, every release detection, every submarine maneuver, stored, analyzed, cataloged. Above the calm surface of the Strait of Hormuz, nothing appears unusual. Merchant ships continue their slow transit between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean. Sunlight reflects across the water. The carrier group moves steadily west. But beneath the surface, the evidence of the brief underwater encounter still drifts silently through the current. 2 disabled submarine contacts somewhere along the seabed, 1 tracked escape route leading south, and a message delivered without a single long-range system being used. Because in the narrow waters of Hormuz, every movement is watched, every signal is recorded, and every submarine captain now understands one thing. The ocean may hide you for a while, but the U.S. Navy is always listening.